Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Fortify podcast. I have my good friend Ben with me today. Ben, thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, man. I'm glad to
Um,
be here.
yeah. Ben, I'm excited to hear your story today. I've heard some of it, but for you guys listening, Ben has just a crazy faith story. One
Yeah.
specific instance that we're talking about, but then there's other things that have happened in your life, Ben, that just been crazy faith, stories. And so I just want to kind of talk about that and just talk about crazy faith with the Lord and what it looks like walking out faith with the Lord. So
Yeah.
uh, go ahead and and tell us a little bit about your story. You
Yeah.
got here in KC a few years ago,
Yep.
and that kind of story alone is just crazy how you got here.
Yeah, it is a crazy story, and I love telling people about it because it's like every time I tell someone, it's like this. There's something new about it that the Holy Spirit like tells me, and I just get excited about it. Um, Even you talking just like before we even get into the story about like crazy faith, I think like at least for me, I was like, what led up to the opportunity to like obey
Mhm.
the Lord in like a crazy way.
Yeah.
And I really think there's an opportunity and an invitation to do that like for every single person
Hmm.
who like follows the Lord. And so I'm just excited because it's like, yes, this is my story, but I think this is like available for anybody and
Yeah,
it's gonna look different for everyone.
absolutely.
Um, but yeah, I think it'll be like 3 years I've been in KC
Mhm.
this summer, I
Okay.
think.
Yeah,
So I
about,
think
about the same time I've been here.
yeah,
Yeah.
because we were on staff at about the same. No,
Yeah, I don't think
it was
we're
like
on
a
our
year.
staff yet. Yeah, there's a little but
Yeah,
little bit of gap between us being on staff together. But
that makes
we were
sense
out in town, probably within a few
for
months of each
sure,
other, I think.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, coming here, it was insane. I think it was like senior year. I had like just encountered the Lord in my room, and it was like I tasted and saw that the Lord was good in this like 3 day span of the Lord just encountering me in my room. And from that place, I walked away from like so many different things. And that was like my testimony. I was like, wow, the Lord's real. I need to like live my life for him. And so after that, he like was just leading me and guiding me in like my hometown in Georgia. I'm from this little town in Warner Robins, Georgia. Not very little. It's like 70K people,
Yeah.
but I grew up thinking it was
Yeah.
little until I came to the sticks in Kansas.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was just like chilling. I was planning to go to YWAM in Orlando, Florida, and so that was already like a huge step.
Mm.
Like all my friends were going to college or like immediately starting to work, and I was like, I want to go to
Yeah.
YWAM. So that was kind of like I was already kind of like I'm doing whatever the Lord wants me
Mhm.
to do. Um, but that was a few months away, and you've obviously heard of the Send, the pre-rally.
Yep.
The pre-rally for the Send was here at Life Mission Church, and Francis Chan was going to be here, and he was someone I like really looked up to,
Mm.
and so I was like, it wasn't like I just wanted to go, even though that was a aspect of it, but I knew the Lord was telling me to go. And it's like, you have to be there on that day. It was like
Wow.
the 4th of July weekend. You have to be there.
That's right.
And I was like, wow, that's crazy. 15 hours away, 15-hour drive away. And so I looked at plane tickets and they were like $600 because of the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And so I was like, Lord, I can't afford that. Like I think I had just started like considering YWAM, like
Hmm.
starting to like plan to save.
Yeah.
I had like $150 in my account. I was
Wow.
like, I mean, I didn't have any expenses,
Hmm.
I was just in high school. And so I was like, Lord, are you sure about this?
Hmm.
And he was like, yes, I am. And I was like, I remember realizing in my room, like, wow, he's actually telling me to
Wow.
do this.
Yeah.
It's not just something I want to do.
Right.
And so I think the first step was just asking my parents. They were the authority in my life, and grew up going to church. They loved Jesus. My mom was out of town at the time, and she said she was like, she wouldn't tell me no, but she was highly against it, I
Yeah.
could say. highly against it, and she was like, "I highly suggest that you do not go." And
Mhm.
it was like tense,
Yeah.
and I love my mom, and that was really hard. I asked my dad, and he was like, he had toured the country with a band named Fish. I don't know if you've heard of them,
Nope.
but he was like, dude, if I toured the country with them, then like, you're going to see this preacher dude in Kansas. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
It's fine. He was concerned, but he was way more chill than my
Right.
mom.
Moms are always little overprotective, little
Yeah,
over concerned.
exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, it was hard with her being out of town. It might have been the Lord, I don't know. But I was like struggling. I remember in my room, like, God, it says to obey my parents. It says to honor them. And he just told me, like, I don't even know if it was in the moment or later, but he was like, you did.
Yeah.
You did honor them. Like, you respected their voice. I remember telling my mom, like, Mom, I don't want this to ruin anything,
Yeah.
like, between you and me.
Yeah.
Like, I know God's telling me to do this. I know you're highly suggesting that I don't. At the end of the day, I have to choose this. I have to choose him.
Yeah. Well, and
And
it's
I,
not like your, and again, from what you're saying, it's not like your mom said no. She
right,
she was not necessarily
right,
in favor of it,
right.
but it's not like you're necessarily disobeying her either. And so again, you
Totally,
brought her into the conversation, and
totally. Yeah,
she gave her opinion, but
yeah,
still sounds like the choice was still up to you. It wasn't like
yeah,
you were dishonoring her
right.
in any way at all. So
And that really changed some things, even just how I view, like looking at it, like if I had a son and he came to me and was just like, Dad, what do you think I should do? That honors me so much,
mm,
and that's like the father's heart. He's like, he wants us to like bring things to him.
yeah,
And I think it's a little different when like I have to obey like the Lord like all the time. But like the honoring does happen in just the ask.
mm,
And I was like, whoa, that's really cool.
yeah,
Like if my son chooses to do a different thing, he's like, Dad, I really just feel like this is the way to go, but I appreciate your voice.
mm,
I would feel honored, you
yeah,
know? I would feel like, okay, I trust your judgment. And like, so that was kind of the story with my mom. Like, she later says, like, like, she's so glad I went. And like,
yeah,
she's so glad I didn't like listen to her,
yeah.
which is funny. But yeah, it worked out. And me and my mom are so close now, like, such a good relationship.
That's awesome.
So blessed. But yeah, so after that got figured out, I was still hesitant. And I was like, the night before, I was wrestling with the Lord. I was like, God, what do I do? And earlier that day, I had asked that same question. I was like, I can't afford a plane ticket.
Mhm.
Like, how am I supposed to get there? And he showed me, like, I was looking out in the driveway, and I saw my beater car I had just gotten from a buddy of mine for $500 with my stimulus check.
The
So,
stimulus.
the stimmy
Yes.
car. It was not the road trip vehicle, to say the least. So I think it was burning around half the money I spent in gas. I had to pay for to refill the oil because it
Sheesh.
was leaking and it was burning oil so badly. It was a 1996 Toyota Tercel.
Okay.
And so you would think it's so funny with me in it. I literally could sit in the back seat and touch the steering
Oh
wheel.
my
And like,
gosh.
it's a tiny car. And so I was like, no way.
Mhm.
Like 15 hours through the mountains, Tennessee, like in
Yeah.
this tiny beater car. I was like, Lord, like, this is what it came down to. I was like, if I go and I break down, I still obeyed him. And like when obedience is the only thing,
Mm.
then it just rules out everything. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, so what I broke down. I'm convinced the Lord's telling me to do this. And so if that's his will, then like I obeyed. That's
Yeah.
my job, is just
Mhm.
to obey. And so the night before, I was like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm going for it. So I took the passenger seat out of my car and I made like a little bed to sleep in, because I didn't know where I was going to stay. I can't afford a
Wow. Yeah.
hotel
You
or
had
anything,
nothing lined up.
like I have to sleep in it.
Yeah.
Like,
Your little plan is driving and showing up, and
yeah,
whatever happens, happens.
literally. I was like, either this or I bring like a tent or like, I don't know. So I made like a bed, threw all my stuff in there. And then that morning I got up and I got in the car and I was just like, so anxious, like so stressed out.
Yeah.
And I just started to drive, and it was like this crazy supernatural thing of like every town, like every sign on the interstate, I got further away from Warner Robins, Georgia, the more peace I had.
Mm.
And it was like, whoa, this is supposed to be the opposite, you know?
Yeah.
Like the farther you go, the harder it is to get
Hmm.
back, you
Yeah.
know? And the more stranded you are.
Hmm.
But the more peace just filled the car. It was like, it was literally like the Holy Spirit was just sitting in the
Oh yeah.
passenger seat,
Yep.
you
He
know?
was riding right along with you.
Yeah, exactly. And so that blessed me. I just remember having so much joy, like
Mm.
so much joy in obeying him, like just smiling for hours driving, you
Yeah.
know, just getting like giddy, just thinking about it. And I would just pray like every time I thought about like the state of my car and like what I was driving.
Yeah.
I remember praying, Lord, work all things together for good in this end,
Yeah.
like you do for me, you know? And so I remember praying that. I remember stopping on the side of the road just to let it breathe, like have the hood
Mm.
up,
Oh wow.
because I didn't want it to overheat. And so this was July, and so I don't know if you've heard of this trick, but you can like turn the heater all the way up, and it
Yep.
helps like
Yep.
cool
Helps
the
cool it
engine.
down. Yep.
Yeah. So middle of July, you know, in Georgia, whatever, Tennessee, Kansas, I had my heat all the way up,
Dude.
and I was sweating buckets. Sweating buckets. Like I didn't have to go to the bathroom. I was drinking so much water, I didn't have to go to the bathroom because I was just sweating
Wow.
so much. And I just had the windows down like the whole time.
Oh yeah.
And so I every once in a while I felt like the Lord just said like it needs a break, and I would like
Mm.
pull over. And so that was like for like 13 hours the
Mm.
first day. I just trucked through the mountains, these huge semi trucks over me. And then um I got to the end of the day, like where I would have to be like looking for a stop, and I hadn't even thought about where I was gonna like park my car,
Hmm.
you know? And so right when I had considered it, there was like a state park sign, and the Lord was like, that's it.
Oh, nice.
On the interstate.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And I like pulled off, and it was like this windy, creepy road. I was so freaked out. I remember just being so scared. And I was just like this windy road. And then like for that particular month or whatever, it was like first come, first serve for like campsites.
Okay.
So I just pulled into this campsite and just parked there. The stars were like beautiful. And it was amazing. I got 9 hours of sleep on
Nice.
this makeshift bed in my car. My feet were in the trunk. My
Dude.
feet were in the trunk, and my head was on the dash, like as a pillow.
Wow.
That's like how small the car was.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the heck? And then there was showers, you know, there, like with
Oh,
the
nice.
bathrooms. So I was like, I'll just go shower.
Yeah.
And then I only had like 2 hours left to drive, so I just went hiking with the Lord. And I can't that was like one of the coolest things about the whole trip was just the hike with the Lord. Like he
Mm.
showed me so many things. And I was like, if this is what it's like to like obey you,
Mhm.
then like I want to do this my whole life,
Yeah.
you know, no matter how crazy it is. And it was just so worth it in that moment. And then I put in Life Mission Church, 2 hours to go, got here. I remember going down the S Drive, you know, and just freaking out. I was freaking out. I was screaming. I was like, I cannot believe this, you know. I was like, there's no way I'm here right now. It was like so surreal. I still remember the parking spot.
Nice.
I still remember the parking spot. Walk in. I'm like 2 hours early, you know, and Tim Gibbs is just hanging out in the foyer,
Mm.
you know, Tim.
Nice.
And I'm like, hey man, is this like the pre rally or the sand or whatever? He's like, yeah, man, you're a little early. And I just told him about what I had all done to get here and stuff. And he was like, that's crazy. I remember him saying, I didn't realize it was that big of a deal.
Yep. Sounds like Tim.
I was like, that's so funny. And so he was like, okay, well, let me get you talking to this guy. He's like running the whole thing, Hunter
Mm. Yep.
Abstein. And met Hunter. He was associated with YWAM, so we had a connection point. And then he's like, dude, where are you gonna stay if you don't like know anybody here? I'm like, I was looking for state parks. There's a few around the area. Like, I'm just gonna stay in my car,
Mhm.
for like the 2 weeks of
Mhm.
the experience, whatever was going on. And he was like, "No way, you're gonna spend the night with us. Like, you can stay with us." This family was housing him, and so I was like, "Wow, that's so crazy." I just walk in and boom, I have a place to stay.
Nice.
I was like, "Wow, that's so cool." I had never experienced that.
Mhm.
I had never experienced family like that, and so walked in there. I was just zoned out the whole 2 hours. I was just watching the worship people practice. I think it was like Lindy Kofer was there, and
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, I don't remember who was it. Our team that was like worshiping,
Probably.
I
Yeah, I don't
think, or
remember
leading. Yeah,
everybody that was doing it.
I don't remember either, but it was amazing, and it flew by because I was just like, I can't believe I'm here. And then yeah, that happened. It was so amazing. Like the pre-rally, it was like I tell people, like, you've had like a sermon someone's preaching and you're just convinced it was for you,
Yeah.
and there's no one else in the room. It feels like it's
Mhm.
like, is everything else just a simulation and I'm like the only
Yeah.
person here? That was it, Francis Chan's message, and it like really changed my life.
Wow.
Like to this day I think about it. And at the end, Pastor Clint, he was like, "Younger generation, come down for prayer. We're gonna pray for you." I'm like, "Free prayer, sign me up."
Always a good thing for free
Yeah, I'm
prayer.
like, "I'll go down." And so I went down, and yeah, I went down, and like I was like in this line, and Pastor Clint like walks off the stage and like meets me, and he's like, "Hey, can I pray for you, whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And he's praying for me, and he's like, I had like a prayer request, but it was just something I like made up in the moment. It wasn't like sincere. I think it
Yeah.
was just like, I just want to love people better or
Mhm.
something like that. And he just dropped it. He didn't even mention it. Pastor Glenn. And he just started speaking all these things over me, like these prophetic words. And he said, "You're gonna meet two people that will change your life forever tonight."
Wow.
And then he just walked away. And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of weird." I grew up Reformed Presbyterian,
Okay.
and I had never experienced anything like that, like a
Wow.
prophetic word or like whatever. Raising your hands in worship was like, that was crazy.
Wow.
I
Just
had just
you're
done
you're
that.
just throwing
Yeah,
yourself into the fire here.
yeah. It was pretty different in a lot of ways, but I was like, I just walked away like, that was weird. you
Mhm.
know, what was that? And then I met. I don't know. I don't think you know them. Ren and Elsie Blake.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I knew.
Did you
Yeah.
did you come over for that worship morning that one night or that
Yeah.
one morning
Yeah. Yeah.
with
Yeah. I hung out with
Jack?
them. Yep. I hung out with
Okay.
them for a little bit before they moved. Yeah.
Okay. Did
Yep.
you know like I met them and like stayed here with them?
Oh, I didn't realize that's who you stayed with. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that I met them that night, and like relationship with them changed my life. Like it
Wow.
changed my whole perspective. And so I looked back and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. Like prophetic words are
Hmm.
a thing,
Yeah.
And I just boom thrown into that.
Mhm.
But yeah, Ren and Elsie they were housing Hunter,
Okay. Yep. That's right. Yep.
and so I stayed with them, and they ended up housing me for 2 months.
Wow.
Just they were like, "We want you to stay here. We love you. Like we want you to experience like life here, whatever." Um, well, actually, they first bought me a plane ticket back because they didn't want me driving my car
Yeah.
back. And then I was like, "I'm just raising money for YWAM. Like, why can't I do it here? I just
Mhm.
experienced this family up here that I didn't have in Georgia." And so I was yeah, they were like, "We'll buy you a plane ticket back, and then we'll house you until YWAM."
Wow.
And I was like, "Wow!" And so they did it, and it was amazing, just like living there with them, experiencing like they're very creative and
Oh
very
yeah.
like artistic, and I had never been kind of like around that
Mhm.
environment, and I was like, "Whoa! I'm creative and like
Yeah.
I'm artsy and like
Yep.
I can draw and I can sing," and like
Hmm.
I realized all that like with them,
Wow.
and
That's
so it
amazing.
really did change my life. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I got here. I went to YWAM after that. I had an amazing experience at YWAM Orlando. Like they're amazing. After that, the send was happening, and so I was like, let's like I want to finish what I started.
Yeah.
And so the Lord was like, just go up and help, like for like a month, like odds and ends with Hunter and
Mhm.
stuff. So I did. I like asked the Frisbees if I
Yep.
could stay for a month. which I ended up staying for 2 years. But I was like, "Can I stay with you guys a month?" And they were like, "Yeah, for sure." And so, because I went to the sand, and the Lord was like, "I want your roots to grow deeper into this soil here."
Mm,
That's like kind of the word he gave me. He's like, "I just want you to work hard." And then he told me Bible school too. And so I didn't know what that looked like. I was like, YWAM, whatever. And now I'm in a Bible school
yeah, you
through
are.
Life Mission
Yep.
Church. So it's pretty crazy, like how the Lord guides like those who obey him,
Yeah.
you know? It's like it was like I remember for a time, like you might relate to this. I feel like everyone does, but when we worship God's voice instead of Him, and like I was convinced for like about a year that knowing God was knowing what to do, you know,
Mm,
like knowing what to
yeah.
do. Like my next step is knowing God. Like
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, so I know what to do next.
Yeah.
And there was a time where like He didn't tell me like
Hmm.
what to do next, and I had to trust Him. And so that's when I really like so there's so much I've learned like in this past seasons of my
Hmm.
life, all because of one like simple act of obedience.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I can't. I think about it all the time, especially like Sabbath, like just trying to remember what the Lord's done for me. I'm like, wow, what if I didn't like get in the car?
Right.
You know, like I don't know where I would be. You know, I
Yeah.
really don't. I have no clue. But the things the Lord's blessed me with, relationships here, and the opportunities is amazing. So that's kind of like the story of me getting here
Dude,
and
that's
like where I am
yeah.
now. So yeah,
It's
that's
that's such a
crazy.
crazy story. Like you literally planned on coming here for one weekend or week, however long the
Yeah.
the pre-rally was,
Yeah.
and you ended up being here, staying here for 3 years. Obviously, you
Nuts.
had a time where you went to Orlando for YWAM and stuff,
Right.
but
Right.
you're still here 3 years later,
Right.
not planning on moving here. Like you
Right.
had no plan to move here.
Yeah.
It was like, oh hey, I just feel like the Lord's calling me
So
to go
crazy.
experience this one event, and
Right.
now like, oh, the Lord's like, oh no, you're gonna stay here.
So
um,
crazy.
so you're gonna remind me. You mentioned that you had kind of your first like real experience with Jesus in your
Hmm.
room,
Yeah.
and then it was what, two was it 2 months later that you drove,
Yeah.
or what
It
was the
was
time
like
span
a
there?
semester of school.
Okay, so like 3-4 months
Yeah.
ish
Yeah.
before you left the pre-rally.
Mm-hmm.
And so then before that experience with Jesus in your room, like what was your relationship with God before? Like
Mm.
had you experienced him before? Were you actively
Yeah.
talking to him, reading your Bible? Like um what did kind of your relationship with Jesus look like beforehand?
Yeah.
And then in that moment, obviously a whole lot shifted,
Yeah.
but what was your perspective of him after that experience in your room?
That's such a good question. Yeah, that's so good. I grew up going to church every Sunday, and so I knew about him. Um, and I knew that he was real. Like I've always known he was real. I always knew there was a God, but I never saw my life living up to him, if
Mm.
that makes sense. I
Yeah.
always felt like ashamed,
Mhm.
and I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that there's a God. I get that he's good maybe, but I just I could never like
Mhm.
be righteous, you know?
Yeah.
And so I never kind of, I was always disconnected from
Mhm.
anything going on with him. Um, so I would say that it was like on paper kind of thing. Like I remember reading my Bible and like checking off the box
Yeah.
and like feeling good about myself, going to church camps and stuff. Um, and so I believe that I was saved. This is actually so cool that you'd ask that because this is actually like a really, what's the word? Like the Lord just told me this.
Mhm.
Like just gave me like language to like
Yeah.
what happened. I was saved like since I was little. Like I
Mhm.
confessed with my mouth, believed wholeheartedly that there was a God, you
Mhm.
know, and that Jesus was God. And my encounter in my room with him was actually the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
Mhm.
Like in that moment I was given the power of the Holy Spirit to walk in obedience because right when that happened I like was able to walk in self-control like I never had
Mhm.
before. I had joy, I had peace. I was able to love my family. And so before then I really just think it was an absence of like honor and respect for Holy Spirit.
Mm.
You know, I didn't invite him into anything.
Yeah.
I didn't know he wanted to be a part of anything.
Yeah.
You know,
There
I
was
didn't.
no
Right.
relationship there.
No relationship. Yeah. So that was kind of what it looked like, if that gives you a picture.
Yeah.
It was just, yeah,
Yeah. No, that's great.
church
Yeah.
going.
It's so cool that you had that experience.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just so encouraging, like hearing your story, and like literally again, it was 3 4 months later,
Yeah.
you had such this at least in my mind, like my perspective, like such this short time span of like,
Yeah.
okay, like you said, you knew who God was before. You would confess your mouth like you were
Right.
saved, but
Right.
you hadn't really experienced him before. You didn't really have
Yeah.
relationship with Jesus
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
And then you have an experience where, okay, now you start like really experiencing Jesus.
Yeah.
And now literally 4 months later,
Yeah.
well 4 months later you actually drove, but like, I mean, how soon after that moment did you know about the send event? Like,
Oh, it was about that same time, a few months after.
okay, a few months after. Okay,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
pretty like heard about it pretty quick,
Yeah.
and then moved. So yeah, you found out about that the send event so quickly,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then made a move immediately after.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
would you say that was kind of your first experience, like hearing the voice of the Lord?
Whoa.
Or did you like hear the voice? Had you heard God's voice or his
Yeah.
leading, his direction
Mm.
before that?
That's such a good question. I think it's funny you ask this, because it's like, this isn't stuff that I like realize like in the moment. You know, it was kind of like, because my church doesn't really, it didn't, they don't really talk about like hearing the voice of God.
Yeah.
Like they don't really believe in that, or at least like teach about it. And so this was all stuff I kind of realized after.
Yeah.
But right when I encountered the Lord in my room, he met me there. It was amazing. After that time, I started walking like an evangelist. Like it was so crazy. Like now that I had the Holy Spirit, it was like all the gifts just like came out, and like I was just like preaching the word like at gas stations and
Yeah.
like the grocery stores, and like I couldn't help it, because it was like the Lord would convict me. Like I would walk past somebody. It wasn't, I don't know, it's convict isn't the right word, but just like it would be like downloads, you know,
Yeah.
like you're supposed to talk to that
Yeah.
person, you know. And so I had been walking in that for those 4 months of like
Okay.
the Lord, like, go talk to that person about me. So I would say that I was hearing the voice of God, and like knew what his voice sounded like, you know,
Yeah.
at that point in time. But this wasn't like stuff I knew about. I was like, oh yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I know the voice of God.
Yeah.
It was
You're learning all this through experience, from what you're
right.
saying. Like you didn't have like any mentors, or
Yeah,
again, like you said, your church didn't
it's so
really
crazy.
teach about that. And
Yeah, I
so
know.
that's,
It's insane.
I think, honestly, I think that's amazing, because from the sounds of it, and
Yeah.
just from knowing you personally, Ben, and just like even aside from that story, just like getting to interact with you, and see everything that
Mm.
you walk in such just genuine amazement
Hmm.
of the Lord and
Wow.
what he
That's
does.
so kind.
And I think maybe that's part of it, your story of just like, you didn't, again, you weren't taught any of this. You were taught about God, but you weren't taught about necessarily relationship with
Yeah.
him. You weren't taught about hearing his voice or
Right.
prophetic words.
Right.
And so you experience all that in such a rawness
Hmm. Yeah.
of just like, you had an encounter with Jesus, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay,
This is
Ben,
just
like
what you do.
here's everything.
Yeah.
And you just
Yeah.
had I think that's maybe part of why you walk in
Hmm.
the way you walk in right now, of just like
Yeah.
genuine amazement with the Lord, because that was kind of your first like real experience with him. You were just
Wow.
amazed
Yeah.
by experiencing Jesus, by walking in evangelism, by
Yeah.
getting impressions from the Lord, like, hey, go talk to that person, go talk to this person, go
Right.
love on that person.
Right.
And so I think that's so cool. And again, you had a foundation, so it's not like you uh, didn't know about God, and then had all this incredible
For
experience, and then
sure.
you were like
For sure.
questioning things, like, oh, what is this?
For sure. For sure.
Um, but I still want to commend you for like,
Mm,
okay, you didn't hold back from God, from what it sounds like.
mm.
You
Yeah.
just completely like surrendered and gave him everything, like in that moment, and just like,
Yeah.
God, I want to live for you. Like, I want to experience this
Yeah.
more.
That's so good.
And that's such, man, I think that's such a gift.
Mm, mm.
And I just want to encourage you, like, don't ever like lose that
Yeah.
genuineness of
Yeah.
just like, in just amazement of what the Lord is doing in your life.
Mm.
Because I think everyone that interacts with you can just, you know, say that they're always so encouraged by you,
Oh, wow.
and just always so happy to be around you, because again, you carry this joy around with you, Ben.
Mm.
And again, just this amazement for the Lord, and just
Wow.
this genuine love for him.
That's so kind.
And I think it's so amazing.
Mm.
And I love just hearing your story. And again, I know there's been so many things after that move here, like the past like 3 years. I know there's been
Yeah.
several things that the Lord has moved in your life, and
Yeah.
even just the provision that He's given in every single area of your life.
Ridiculous.
Again,
Yeah.
like you said, um, you automatically got a place to stay here, like that
Right.
first day you moved here. And
Right.
and then I know you've had a recent blessing with your vehicle and stuff. And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I forget if you had another car before, or no, you had the Mustang.
Yeah.
You had the Mustang first,
Insane.
and
Insane.
then you just got blessed with like your dream car.
Yeah. It's so crazy. That's insane. Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate that. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the provision of the Lord though to um what's the word? Yeah, it's just it's overwhelming just thinking about all the things that he's provided.
Hmm.
You know, he just provides for those who like are willing to
Yeah.
like obey, you know.
Mhm.
And like I think that's like such a good point. It's like I walked in such a rawness
Mhm.
early on. I think what helped with that was just like the way the Lord used Francis Chan. Like I would just like binge Francis Chan sermons.
Nice.
'Cause I was just like I was like, "Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense,"
Yeah.
you know? Just having an eternal perspective,
Hmm.
you know? It's like if you have an eternal perspective, nothing else matters
Yeah.
than like obeying the Lord with like every chance, every breath I get,
Right.
you know? And so I think that was kind of what led to such a like radical obedience, I guess you could say. It was just like a radical perspective,
Yeah.
you know. And it should be called radical. It should just be called this is what
Yeah.
following
Just
Jesus
just
looks
just
like.
normal. Just
Yeah.
normal following Jesus.
Yeah.
But
Right.
yeah, I think that's such a hard, maybe not hard, concept of just like, hey, ultimately nothing in this life matters
Yeah.
except for following Jesus.
Yeah.
That's something I've been working on walking uh, through more in my life over the past like year or two.
Mm,
Just like,
yeah.
hey, like literally, God have everything in
Yeah.
my life. Have my finances, have my time, have my possessions, have my relationships.
Yeah.
Um, Walking in again what we might consider radical obedience, but should just be
Yeah.
normal life with Jesus.
Yeah.
Of just like, hey, God, I want to walk with you. Like, I want to give you everything. And it's easier said than done,
Yeah. For
especially for a
sure.
lot of people.
Yeah.
You're in a stage where you're what, 20,
21.
21?
Yeah.
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 So you're only like 3 years out of high school.
Yeah.
And like you said, you moved here right after high school.
Yeah.
And so obviously you got your family back there, but
Yeah.
you didn't have a job, you didn't have college, you didn't have
Yeah.
a girlfriend, you didn't
Yeah.
have,
It's
any
crazy.
of this stuff necessarily tying you down. And so
Yeah.
it's, first of all, I want to say, uh, walk in that for as long as you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's something I've been like realizing is like, oh man, like once I get into a relationship and once I like have kids and a family, which is a desire of mine, like,
Yeah.
man, there's gonna be so much less time I have for the things of the Lord.
Yeah.
Now, family and marriage and all that is of the Lord, and so
For
the Lord
sure.
like moves through all that.
Yeah, it just looks
But
different. Yeah.
yeah, like right now, I'm so enjoying being single
Yeah.
and just enjoying uh, just spending time as much time with the Lord as I can.
Yeah.
Like it's been so great, and I haven't really realized the gift of that until like recently. I'm just like, oh wow, like
Mm.
I really just get to pursue the Lord
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
spend time with Him and
Yeah.
pursue the things that He wants me to pursue.
That's so good though.
And I've been dreaming with Him so much more lately, and so
Oh,
it's been
it's
cool
so
just like
good.
kind of walking out some of those dreams and just envision those dreams. And
Yes,
I
that's
was
so good.
talking to somebody the other day about it, and of just like, oh man, I don't know what it's gonna be like bringing someone else into
Yeah.
my life with the Lord, and
Right.
just bringing a spouse and kids. And just, I was like,
Mhm.
oh man, that's gonna be so different.
Yeah.
Um, so I just want to say like, hey, enjoy the season while you can.
Yeah.
Um,
That's so good,
but
Dylan.
uh, but yeah, for people who have a family, who have
Yeah.
uh, you know, jobs and careers and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
it can be so much harder sometimes to
Yeah.
just say, God, I give you everything, because there's so much more to give.
Mm.
There's so much more to surrender to
Mm.
Him, and so much
Yeah.
more that sometimes we hold on to.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so cool uh, that you're building this foundation right now
Yeah. Wow.
with the stage that you're in and the
For
age you are
sure.
right now, of just like, hey, you are building such an incredible foundation of just like,
Mm.
Jesus hears everything.
Yeah, that's so good.
Like, you walk with such open hands,
Yeah.
and I think it's very inspiring
Wow.
for everyone that
Mm.
sees you walk in that.
Mm.
And so what just how has, I know we've talked a little bit, but
Mhm.
with all these steps of faith, with all these crazy acts of faith that you've had in just your journey,
Mm.
uh, specifically looking at the Lord bringing provision
Mm.
into your life,
Yeah.
and you taking steps of faith
Yeah.
and doing the things the Lord has called you to do, and then seeing the fruit of those things.
Mhm.
Just how has that impacted you personally and grown you personally,
Whoa.
just as a person, as a man, as a friend, as a son? Just what does that look like in your life?
Wow. Yeah, that's so good. I think it does so much for your identity
Mm,
in him. I think like so much of the father is what does the father provide,
mm,
and that sounds like kind of like twisted, but I mean it really is. Like the father provides love, he
mm.
provides provision, yes, of like financial stuff, but there's so many different aspects that the father provides the son,
Yeah.
that makes the son his son,
Mhm.
and so I think it changes everything, like I I've experienced just, I mean, even with this school, like, let's talk about that. Like, it's this school, it's, it's like so much, yeah. He told me to do the school. He didn't tell me to do the school. He like led me to the door of the
Mhm.
school and was like, if you open the door, like, I'm going to bless it. If
Mhm.
you walk away from the door, I'm going to bless it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, perfect, and I really just feel like it was the best step. And so I walked through the door of this school that I'm doing, and I committed with like 20% of like the money I
Mhm.
needed after like months of saving. And um just to walk in trust and to obey, even like, and that was the crazy thing, is like he didn't tell me to do it. And so it's like
You just
I've
gotta,
trusted you to
yeah.
provide for me when you've told me specifically to do something, but he challenged me. I remember so clearly, he just whispered in my ears like, can you trust me to provide for you when I don't specifically tell you to do something,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. He gave you a choice.
yeah,
It was like, oh hey, like you said, like, hey, if you walk through this door, I'm gonna bless it.
yeah,
If you don't, I'm still gonna bless it. And I
exactly,
think that's such a cool concept, and just cool thing about the Lord, because
mm,
when it comes to like hearing the voice of the Lord, we're never gonna get it right 100% of the time.
yeah,
Like, if we hear the Lord tell us to do something,
mm,
or if we think we're hearing the Lord tell us to do something, like,
yeah,
it might be the Lord. It also can sometimes just be our flesh of just like, hey, this is what I feel like I'm supposed to do.
yeah,
It might be the Lord. It might not be the Lord.
yeah,
There's sometimes where it's not. always super clear.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think if we have the heart of, okay, I want to obey the Father,
Right.
I want to obey Jesus,
Right.
and I'm generally praying about this, or even if it is just like, okay, I'm at the grocery store and I feel impressed to go interact with somebody, to go pray for somebody,
Yeah.
and we're generally like, okay, I generally think this is the Lord, and we're just trying to act out in obedience.
For
Like, I
sure.
think the Lord honors that,
Yeah.
of just like,
That's
hey,
really good.
we might not get right 100% of the time,
Yeah.
but if it's out of trying to genuinely be obedient to the Lord
Yes.
in what we hear, then I think the Lord's going to bless that.
For sure.
Again, we might get embarrassed if we think we're supposed to pray for somebody and they're like, "Oh no, I don't." And I mean,
Yeah.
well, even sometimes if we do feel if it is the Lord telling us to pray for somebody, they might still reject it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but there might be some embarrassment or whatever and stuff, doing something that we feel like is the Lord, but and then maybe it's not. But
Yeah.
that's all just crazy faith, too,
Yeah.
and stuff. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time, and
Right.
sometimes you're going to have those moments.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, anyways, I just think
That's
that's
so
so
good.
cool and such a great perspective. Just like, hey, sometimes we hear the voice of the Lord, right? Sometimes we don't,
Yeah.
and sometimes God is just giving us a choice of like,
Yeah.
hey, here's something I laid before you.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily right or wrong to
Yeah.
walk through this open door. I'm
Right.
giving you the choice, and I
Exactly.
think that's so cool that, like, God doesn't want to like control our lives
Mm.
or anything. Like,
Yeah.
He has a plan for us, He has a purpose for us, and He
Yeah.
wants to lead and guide and direct us.
Yeah.
But He's not a manipulative
Right.
God. Like, He gives us free will and gives us free choice,
Yes. That's so good.
and there's sometimes just good things that, like, okay, hey, we can walk through the door or we cannot walk through the door. Like, God
Yeah.
gives us a choice. It's not like it's right or wrong.
For
Like you
sure.
said with the school, like, hey, there was kind of two open doors. There's an open
Yeah.
door to walk through the school.
Yeah.
There's an open door to not walk through the school.
Yeah.
But God was saying, like, hey, are
Totally.
you going to trust me to provide for you no matter what door you open?
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. Because I was like, I kind of started worrying about what, or like that that God would provide for me when He stopped kind of like leading me on like the exact steps and directions of
Yep.
like my life. And so that's like so important to realize that He's my provider when He tells me to do something or when He gives me the
Yeah.
option to do something. And there's so many times when I've like gone to the Lord like, God, what do I do? Like,
Mm.
what do I do? And He's like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Like He's like, well, what do you want to do? Like, what's
Yeah.
your heart? Like He's like, I've been like molding your heart,
Mhm.
and like I like the closer I get to Him, the more things that I want that line up with His heart.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's been so many times where the Lord's just like, what do you want to do?
Mhm.
And I'll bless it. So I think that's just like the beautiful thing about the Lord. And like, that's my heart. If I had a son and he comes to me and he's like stressed out about like what to do next, and I was like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Like, what's your heart? Like, tell me about your heart. Like, why do you want
Mhm.
to do this? And like, oh yeah, I'll partner you with you in that.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. That lines up with my values and my heart. So like, I'm gonna bless that.
Yeah.
And so I think we just miss that part of
Mhm.
the Father sometimes,
Yeah.
and we think He's just like a divine like rule giver and like yes or no answer.
Yeah.
So that's really good, Dylan.
Yeah. Yeah. He,
That's
he
really good.
cares about what we care about, and
Yeah.
He wants to see us walk in joy and us and walk in fullness. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he loves seeing us happy. And
Yeah.
so sometimes that's just Him asking us, like, hey, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just, hey, what do you care about? Like, and the word says, like, He puts desires on our heart. So, like,
Mhm.
as long as they're not against His word, like,
Yeah.
there's still things He cares about. There's still things, He's leading us to do, because He's designed each of us
Yeah.
to live a certain way, to follow a certain calling and have certain passions and giftings. And so,
Right.
in all that, He's molded us
Mhm.
to do things that please Him.
Yeah.
And so when He gives us a choice and says, like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, hey, what do you want to do today? Or,
Yeah.
do you want to go on a hike today? Or do you want to go play pickleball today? Whatever it is, like,
Yeah.
He cares about those small things too. And
Yeah.
so He's he's just so cool.
So good. That's so good.
So so Ben, what about maybe you don't have any of these instances, but um, again, you've had so many amazing moments where God has come through.
Yeah.
So what about, are there any situations or any instances, and you don't have to like give details if you don't want, but just like, hey, any moments where like God hasn't come through,
Whoa.
or he's like, whether he's straight up said, no, don't do this,
Mm,
or maybe it's something that you still are, pressing into him about.
yeah.
If you have it, I'd just love to hear that perspective. Like, okay, hey, you've had some crazy faith stories.
Yeah.
You've had some crazy ways where God has clearly come through and
Yeah.
clearly provided for you
Right.
in some big ways.
Right.
And so, what does that look like compared to walking out the moments where, like, oh, hey, God has either told me no about whatever it is, or there's stuff I'm still walking through and it's taking a little bit longer
Yeah.
than maybe some of these other things have.
Yeah, that's so good. That's such a good question. The first one I think of is like I was really committed to a relationship I had here with my girlfriend, and that was like one of the things I thought the Lord said to me like about staying here. Is like let your roots grow here in this community, Bible school, and then her. And I was like, I want to stay here and like pursue this girl, and that like didn't work out, and so that was like really hard. I was like, whoa, like this is like one of the things that like I really felt like you were leading me to do
Yeah.
here, and now that's gone. And so that was like something that I had to like really process with the Lord, and a lot of it's just like a mystery. And like looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, totally,
Hmm.
like the Lord like guided me through the whole thing
Yeah.
still. It's not like he like dropped it. He dropped it with me,
Hmm.
And so it's just something like you really have to process with the Lord. And it's a hard thing,
Yeah.
disappointment. It's a hard thing. The other thing uh, that I can think of just right off the top of my head is like so much redemption happened to my family when I encountered the Lord. It was so crazy. Like I'm the oldest of I have three younger siblings, and so there was such a shift in my household when I started loving Jesus
Mm.
and loving them. Um, and like you can ask my two sisters and my brother just how big of a deal it was, because it's changed their lives,
Wow.
like they've walked in different things, and I really believe that they've cared about the Lord more because of my faith and love in him. And so, and I believe that for my mom and for my dad too. And so I was really believing that the Lord would just like really redeem a lot of things in my family. Around the same time I broke up with this girl here, my parents got a divorce back home in Georgia. And so I was like, what? I didn't have all that weight on my shoulders, but I was believing for some things,
Yeah.
and I was like, Lord, you've done so much in my family already through my faith, and like I just wanted it to be like complete, and I wanted
Yeah.
the relationship to be like redeemed. And that didn't happen,
Yeah.
and so that was like really hard for me. And I it's like I'd never once doubted the character of the Lord,
Mm.
but it was like I have to grieve this with him, and
Yeah.
like this is really hard. And it does sometimes feel like the Lord didn't come through in those moments, which is really hard,
Yeah.
and so that's just something that like again the father heart, you have to run to him. And it says like in Psalms 32, I was just reading this, like my soul groans all day long if I don't say anything
Yeah.
to you, and I was just like, wow, that's literally how it is. If I keep that inside, it prevents intimacy with him. And
Mm.
so, and it's one of the biggest reasons I am like close to the Lord, is like through pain and like hurt and disappointment, is when I've chose to run to
Yeah.
him and do it with him and grieve with him,
Hmm.
because he cares so much about like the brokenhearted, and he loves to comfort.
Mm.
A wonderful counselor, he's like
Yeah.
he's like the best supporter ever.
Mm.
And so he loves to sit with us in that. So yeah, those are the two things that pop up to me where I was just kind of like, yeah, that really sucks. Like I did all the right things, it
Yeah.
feels like, and like things didn't come through. Like the Lord didn't come through.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
hard stuff for sure.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Growth with the Lord doesn't always come through the easy seasons
Yeah. Yeah.
and the easy
That's really true.
conversations.
That's really
Uh,
true.
Bex and I were talking uh, a little bit about that of just like, hey,
Mm.
there needs to be vulnerability with the Lord.
Yeah.
And vulnerability isn't just like, oh, cool, God, thanks for this, thanks for that, giving him
Yeah.
praise, which we need to be doing. It's important to give God praise. And,
Right.
um, but we also like need to be vulnerable with the Lord. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
this hurts, that hurts. I'm mad at you. I'm upset. Like, I don't feel close to you right now. I don't see you
Yeah.
moving, you
Yeah.
know, uh, and God uses, he doesn't cause the pain, but he uses the pain to
Yeah.
bring us closer in relationship with him
Yes.
and just reveal more of his heart to us.
Yeah. It's
And
insane.
so, would you, I mean, again, from everything I've seen, like those instances that you've had of like painful, of like, oh, yeah, I thought this was the Lord, or like, hey, the Lord didn't redeem this,
Yeah.
from everything I've seen, like that has so brought you closer to the Lord. So, like,
Yeah.
what encouragement would you give people or advice would you give people that, like, hey, I'm praying for something, I'm walking through something,
Yeah.
and the Lord either did not come through
Yeah.
or he still has not answered it or come through. Like, just what encouragement or advice would you give people
Wow.
of just like, hey, uh, because we don't want those things to tear us from God,
Yeah.
and we still need to pursue Him in the midst of those things, but it's hard.
Right.
So just kind of what advice or encouragement would you give people that are
Mm.
kind of in that situation?
Yeah, that's so good. I think just like allowing him in and allowing him to do that what he wants to do. Um like ever since I encountered him in my room, it was so clear and evident that he was a father
Mm,
to me. And that changed everything. When I saw God as a father, like that really changed everything. And not only a father, but a perfect father. And um, so I think just like allowing him to comfort
mm,
you in that, and like rather than like doubting his character, or I mean, even if you do that, like tell him that, like, God, I'm doubting you,
yeah.
and like never not be vocal with him
Mm,
and never not run to him. And
mhm,
it's like there's so much on the other side of like
mm,
conversation with
yeah.
him. And there's been so many sweet times with him that have started with like, God, I feel like you're so far, and just saying that, and like, God, I don't want to talk to you right now,
Yeah.
and so much has happened from that place of just like being transparent with the Lord, because he already knows, and so I think when we hesitate to engage with him
Mm,
in our trouble is when things can go like really south. And
mm,
because that's just like it's just such a beautiful bridge to him.
yeah.
And I've just encountered the sweet presence of the Lord so many times
Yeah.
in like my hurt, and just
Mm,
telling him about it. It's just so
yeah.
cool.
And I think that hesitation can be huge
Yeah.
because, again, especially in those moments where, like, okay, we're having a hard time with the Lord, or like
Mm,
we're praying for something, it's not, come to fruition.
mm,
Uh, it can open a door for the enemy to come in
yes.
and start
Yeah.
speaking lies to us, start
Yeah.
speaking doubts to us. And so I think what
Yeah.
you said about hesitating to go to the
Yeah.
Lord with things and just pursue Him and pursue His presence
Yeah.
in the midst of all that, I think is huge.
Yeah.
Because if we do hesitate, like, it creates that open door. But if we just immediately go to God and it's
Yeah.
like, hey, here's what I'm going through, God, like, I just need you, and continue to pursue Him,
Yeah.
it closes that door to the enemy and closes the door to lies and doubts, and not that it's perfect every time, and not that we have to be perfect. There's going to be attacks from the enemy on our lives.
Yeah.
There's going to be doubts and fears. It's not like we're ever going to be perfect. Even when we do go to the Lord, it's not like
Right.
all our fears and doubts are immediately like out of our mind.
Yeah,
They still can linger and stuff.
for sure.
But no, I think that's huge, man,
Yeah,
and that's just so good. And I love, uh, yeah, I love just hearing your story and just hearing
yeah.
your heart,
So
for
good.
people.
So good.
And so, thanks so much for sharing
Yeah,
today. And I
yeah,
just want to open it up. And if you have any last encouragements
yeah.
to people, just again about crazy faith, and just again, if someone is hesitating to take a crazy faith leap,
Mm.
what would you say to them?
Wow. Yeah, that's so good. I want to just like touch on the last topic real
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
I've been reading Job, and I just read like the end of it, and it was like so cool. The Lord just highlighted this to me, but he's talking to like the friends that give wise advice to him, and he's like, "You said the wrong thing, unlike Job."
Mm,
And like Job was just like cursing God, you know? And Job had said so many things that were like completely out of place
mm,
that the Lord humbled him about. And just like the Lord still appreciates his honesty and
mm,
like his struggle,
mhm.
and like how he vocalized it to the
Yeah.
Lord. And you see it all over the Psalms too, like David just like like just expressing where he is,
Mhm.
whether it's a good place or not. So I think the Lord honors that so
Yeah.
much when we
That's
just
good.
like vocalize things with Him. Um, yeah, for people like, can you ask the question again? Like,
Yeah, yeah. For
the
people that are hesitating to take a crazy faith,
yeah,
leap, maybe the Lord's leading them and directing them to do something, or go to another state, whatever it is,
yeah,
and they're hesitating, and or even just don't know, like, is this the Lord? Like, what would you just say in encouragement to them,
that's
from your
so good.
experience of just like, hey,
Yeah,
you're kind of a little bit of a pro
no,
in the head of just like, hey,
no.
so
Yeah, that's such a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is wise counsel. That has single-handedly helped me obey the Lord's voice probably more than anything, except like being with him and
yeah.
like spending time with him. Um, just surrounding yourself with like people who hear his voice too, who can see a different perspective. And all over the Bible, it commends that,
Mm,
leaning on each other.
mm,
And so, yeah, just like ask someone who
mm,
loves him too. Like, what do you think about this? Do you see me like doing this, or do you see God calling me to this? And like, um, that's so important. That's so important. And there's so many times of like little disappointments, like I mentioned like the girlfriend and my family, like
yeah.
those are like the two really big ones. But littler ones where that could have been so easily avoided with just talking to someone
Mm,
first who loves him. And so like if it's on your heart, just talk to somebody about it, and then talk to the Lord about what that person said. And like I think 100% assurance isn't the goal,
mm.
which is hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard. But it's like if you were 100% sure, then you wouldn't need any faith to do it.
Wow.
And so it's like I think one guy at YWAM, he told me, he was like, if you're 51% sure of something, and you've wise counsel,
Mm,
whatever, it's a vague statement, but then like that's enough reason to like do it.
yeah.
And the goal isn't 100%.
Mm,
Like God's not going to give you that
right.
in a sense,
Yeah.
and so um, yeah, that's really the two things that I can think of that's really helped me honor
Mm,
like the potential to obey him.
yeah. No,
So
I think that's great. Yeah.
yeah,
Like you said, wise counsel, and having wise counsel of people who
yeah,
are strong in the Lord,
yes,
that do hear from the Lord,
yeah,
and
and then know you,
yeah, that
yeah,
know you,
yeah,
and someone who's hopefully, like, at least hopefully you have a couple people in your life, someone who's like older and has been through,
yes,
more
yeah,
than you
that's so
have, maybe
good.
similar experiences that you have, and is a little bit
Mm-hmm.
further along than you in
Yeah,
certain areas that you're walking out, and also having, you know brothers and sisters, that are
right,
we're walking alongside,
for sure.
that are friends and community and just can kind of encourage us and walk us through those things.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah. And then reassurance,
Mm.
man, dude, that's huge because even if the Lord does clearly speak to us, even if
Yeah.
we do clearly hear from the Lord, like, okay, I know this is the Lord,
Yeah.
there's still like the
Uh-huh.
flesh.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, in my spirit, I know it's the Lord.
Yeah.
But with my flesh, I'm like, oh, this scares me. Like this doesn't seem right. This
For
makes me
sure.
nervous, whatever it is. And so
For
that's
sure.
can be where that um part of us comes in. It's like, okay, we're not totally sure this is the Lord. And like you said, we don't always have that uh full 100% assurance
Right.
that what we're walking out,
Right.
is the Lord.
Yeah.
Um but again, like you said, like, okay, if you first have, that wise counsel, like, hey,
Yes.
here's what I feel like the Lord is leading me in and called me
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
having those wise counsel. And then at that point, it's just taking that leap of faith,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is hard. It's
Yeah.
crazy sometimes. But again, like kind of what we talked a little bit earlier is, hey, the Lord can still bless that, even if it's the wrong decision.
For sure.
The
For
Lord can
sure.
redeem it,
Yeah.
even if it's still the wrong decision, even if it's still the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And
That's so good.
so it's just always going back to the Lord and just staying faithful to Him
Yeah.
and just continuing to do everything we can to walk out in obedience.
For sure. That's so huge, Dylan. I think another big thing is like addressing expectations for like what it's gonna look like when
Yeah.
I obey the Lord. Because
Mm.
like I think uh, even like coming here, like I was like totally aware that I could break down.
Mm.
Like that might be like what happens.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I like didn't hear the voice of God, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's like something to consider. It's like, okay, if this all goes like south compared to like where I'm thinking it's gonna go, am I still gonna be like confident that the Lord did tell me to do that?
Yeah.
You know? I think that's huge. I think of like Abraham and Isaac,
Mm.
like God told Abraham to offer his son
Mhm.
on the altar.
Yeah.
And then he told him not to.
Yeah.
Does that mean that like he didn't hear him the first
Mm.
time?
Nope.
And so it's like you have to like that's a wrestle, that's a
Yeah.
struggle. But like that's something I think is like really helpful to consider,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
And also just as you're talking, just realizing that uh the Lord uses people
Yeah.
to bring blessing into other people's lives, and people are not perfect.
Yeah.
And so like looking at,
That's
looking at when you got here for the send, you know, Pastor
so
Clint,
good.
he gave you word that, hey, like two people that you meet tonight are going to impact your life forever.
Right.
Okay. Those two people, did not walk out what the Lord
Mm.
told them to do. And obviously I don't know if the Lord spoke to them,
Yeah.
too directly of like,
Yeah.
oh, hey, you need to provide housing for
Right.
this person, or,
Right.
What their perspective in that
Yeah.
story was. But just that general idea of like, okay, hey, if we, walk out something, if we walk out something we feel God has called us to do,
Mm.
most likely there's another person,
Mm.
on the earth that the God is using in that situation
That's a crazy idea.
to bless us or to, uh, whatever it is,
Right.
there's somebody else like
Right.
in that scenario. And sometimes people just don't walk out,
Mm.
what we're called to do. So even if you had walked out
Right.
everything that the Lord called you to do with coming here,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
if every single person or certain people here didn't walk out their calling and providing blessing for you, providing provision for you,
Mm.
whatever it is, it's
Yeah.
not that you didn't walk out what God
Right.
told you to do.
Right.
It's that they didn't walk out what God
Yeah.
told them to do.
Yeah. That's a
And so
crazy
there's that
perspective.
aspect too that we have to realize sometimes, which is like, it's not that God didn't provide.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just that
Mm.
situations happened where people did not walk out what they were supposed to do that impacts our blessing, that impacts what God has called us to do.
Yeah. That's really good.
And so that's
Yeah. That's really
just
healthy.
hopefully that'll encourage some people of just like, hey, if there's something that you're walking through, there's something that you're praying about that
Yeah.
um you think the Lord hasn't provided yet. And again, not ignoring the aspect of like, hey, we don't control God's timetable.
Mhm.
And so we don't control like when God, does something or doesn't do something.
Mhm.
But there is also an aspect of just like think about like, hey, God uses people to bless other people.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it might be somebody is just taking a while to listen to the Lord about something that they need to do
Mm.
that impacts your blessing in your life and impacts the the steps of faith that you're walking out.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
That's a really interesting idea. That's
but
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, well, man, thanks so much for
Yeah.
chatting today,
Yeah.
and
So fun.
love hearing your story. And so, if you guys are listening, hopefully this has encouraged you just hearing about some crazy faith from Ben. And I'm sure I'll probably talk to you again sometime and have you on here. And
Yeah. I'll be around.
yeah, so hey guys, if you can, I'd love and appreciate if you liked and shared and reviewed.
All the things.
Yep, all of those things for this podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining today, guys. All right, have a good one.